I think society's attitudes to race were quite different, very different to how they are now. Life could be tough, particularly in some of the parts of London where we were living. And open discrimination wasn't as rare as I think many people would think. We had to make compromises and sacrifices. Your success rests in your own hands. You have to work hard. You have to be passionate about what you do. You have to invest your soul into that enterprise, and you have to make sacrifices. One of the things that became very clear to me early on in my career was the power of pulling together teams that thought or worked in different ways.
Hi, I'm Marcus Shah at Eaton Bridge Partners. I'm part of the CFO and Finance Practice. In support of Inclusion Week, myself and some colleagues have conducted a series of interviews with business leaders to discuss their backgrounds, career paths, and how we can collectively continue to increase awareness on this key topic. I'm here today with Nimesh Patel. He's a FTSE 100 CFO who's going to share some of his background and insights with us and around how D&I has shaped his outlook on business and society as a whole. I know we've discussed it before and we've had the sort of conversation about experiences and I guess to sort of get things moving. Can you just sort of set a bit of context, a bit of background in terms, I'm not talking work background, almost a bit of family background, you know, where's the family from, you know, what led you to being in this country and family in this country?
So I grew up in Croydon in London and had relatively modest upbringing. Hardworking, first generation immigrants. My father had come here from Kenya to study for his A-levels. He then got his degree, and as most of his generation had done, started up a business. In fact, ran several businesses at that time.
Sounds the same in my family.
Well, exactly. And my mother came over once they were married. Yeah, I think the interesting thing about that time, which is really sort of the 80s, the early 80s, is that I think society's attitudes to race were quite different, very different to how they are now. And at times, life could be tough, particularly in some of the parts of London where we were living. And open discrimination wasn't as rare as I think many people would think that it is today.
Yeah, it's quite unbelievable, isn't it? And I think that's the exact point. I think people aren't aware because you don't hear what you don't see, you don't see what you don't hear, and I think growing up in that sort of environment. I mean, in terms of your parents, you mentioned obviously having their own businesses. Were there hardships, or was it quite comfortable in some aspects, or was it that real working class sort of hard graft sort of upbringing?
With any sort of entrepreneurial venture, there's always a large degree of risk, and there's always an uncertainty that comes along with that. And actually, I grew up with that in part. So we definitely found that there were times that were hard, and that where we had to make compromises and sacrifices, and there were times when things were going a little better. The other thing that I was left with a very strong sense of was work ethic, and just how hard both my parents worked, because part of owning your own business is really investing all of your time, your energy, and your effort into making it successful.
Yep.
And therefore, there wasn't a concept of a 5-day work week. It was effectively a 7-day work week. And honestly, through my entire childhood, I never went on a holiday with both my parents.
Wow.
Because one or other always had to be here working. In fact, holidays were relatively rare. And I had a much younger brother, who's about 6 years younger than me. And actually, whilst the parents were away, quite often it fell to me to look after him and to help raise him. So I was the one who would sit there and do his homework with him. When he was struggling, I was the one who would quite often make lunch as well for him, just during the weekends when no one else was home. And so that was quite interesting for me, because I think that one of the really positive things that I think came out for me was that understanding of your success rests in your own hands. You have to work hard. You have to be passionate about what you do. You have to invest, your soul into that enterprise, and you have to make sacrifices.
I think that's, just talking about the sort of setup and background, that's a huge responsibility at such a young age as well. And, you talk about that work ethic piece and how that's driven, I guess your mindset and your wants in life.
At the same time, I think it's a question of being the best version of yourself. It's about understanding where your skills and your strengths lie. And so at a relatively early age, I was pretty clear about how I wanted to manage my career, what things motivated me, interested me. And I was prepared to take a chance on doing something that actually I didn't know much about, and there wasn't anyone around me that could really advise me about.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. You mentioned about the advising you piece, and investment banking is a very specific area to go into and to focus on at such a young age as well. Were there any particular role models or any particular sort of careers conversations that led you that way? Or what is it that inspired you, or I guess gave you that drive to want to go to investment banking?
So if I'm honest, I think when I started at university, I didn't have a strong drive to be an investment banker. In fact, when I started at university, I couldn't honestly have told you what investment bankers did. But what I did do was go into university with a really open mind about the opportunities that were available to me. And I actually didn't intern with an investment bank. In my first year of university, during the holidays, I went to the US and I worked on the East Coast. And I worked very much as a cleaner, a cook, a busboy in various motels and restaurants. And the idea was just to earn enough money to then be able to purchase an Amtrak ticket and travel up and down the East Coast. So very, very kind of different to the sorts of careers I might think about later. And when I came back the following year, then I looked at various options. I looked at accountancy firms, I looked at actuary firms, I looked at banks. But actually, the thing that really caught my attention was the Bank of England. And I was lucky enough to be offered a place at the Bank of England, working in what was then called the Gilt Edge and Money Markets division. And one of the things that really struck me was the quality of the people that I was working with, really bright people, and the level of responsibility they were prepared to give me as someone sort of brand new into the business. And I was doing some really interesting work, and actually I had an article published in the Gilts Review, which I know doesn't sound like a big thing, but it certainly was for me at the time. And I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to go, I think, and explore opportunities in organizations like that. And I guess what really came across for me with banking was that I describe it as the ultimate meritocracy. Investment banking is really driven by passionate people who, again, work really hard, who are incredibly intelligent, and where that intelligence is really valued alongside with insight. And most importantly, I didn't think the opportunity was constrained. It wasn't constrained by anything, and it certainly wasn't constrained by age, and that was important for me. Certainly when I went in those early years into investment banking, I really didn't perceive or experience anything that I felt was holding me back from being able to do the role I really wanted to do.
You mentioned about being at home and looking after your brother and your parents working exceptionally hard to be able to provide for the family. When you think about your sort of school days as well, and you mentioned about your family having their own business, was it very much sort of school in the day, support the business in the evening, or were you able to sort of actually focus on your studies entirely to allow you the opportunity then to progress on to things like university?
For me, I was able to focus on my work because my parents took care of the business, and actually I didn't need to spend as much time on it. I mean, I would go there from time to time, but it was rare. But I'll share this story with you because this was quite important for me. One time when I went to help my parents with the business, and at that point they owned a shop, and My father would do the sort of restocking of the shop once a week. So he would go to the cash and carry, and he'd come back with a car sort of loaded up with all sorts of things, right, to sell in the shop. And there was a young kid who probably was at that point very early teens. And I came in one day, and I came in quite early. So it must have been, 7 o'clock in the morning, which is about the time when they used to open up, 6:37.
Yeah.
And this kid was sat outside, and it was cold, right? And it was dark. And we opened up the shop, and my father would typically go to the cash and carry at about 11 o'clock. And he went outside, and he spoke to the kid, and he came back in, and the kid was still sat there. And I said, why did you go outside? And he said, I know that kid. What he often does is he helps me unload the cash and carry from the car and bring it into the shop, which is really nice of him. I mean, he can't carry anything heavy, but he brings in stuff. And he said, he came once and he asked me if he could help. And I said, sure, you can help. And afterwards I said, you can have a drink and, some sweets or a chocolate bar or whatever you want from the shop. And that's, and he said, I like that. I like to encourage. And he said, but one time I made a mistake. Instead of going at 11 o'clock, so this kid would come back. He said, one time I made a mistake. Instead of going 11 o'clock, for whatever reason, he had to go at 10 o'clock. And he didn't think, and he unloaded everything himself. And it was all done. And then the kid sort of showed up at 11, and he had to say to the kid, I'm really sorry I've done it. And he said to the kid, but don't worry, take the sweet, take the chocolate, and the kid said, no, I haven't earned it. So I'm not going to take it. But what I'm going to do from now on is I'm going to turn up early. And so my dad had gone out and said, don't worry, I'm not going till 11. And the kid was like, no, I'm going to wait here. And I remember seeing him and thinking about the opportunities I'd had and thinking to myself, this is what's really important in society. It's about how do you find kids like that? There's something innate, right, in him. He's got a drive to want to do better. He's got a real understanding of how he can contribute to his own success. And he's prepared to put that effort in, right? Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's difficult, even when there perhaps isn't a role model for him to look up to. And that, how do we support kids like that? How do we allow them to be the best version of themselves? How do we make sure that we don't lose that in the time that they grow up, as other pressures come, as they face other pressures and they face other burdens in life? How do we make sure we don't lose that and get the best out of them? So that was one of the things I took away from the experience that my parents had in running that shop.
Well, it's unbelievably impactful, and without jumping around too much, there is almost a bit of a segue into the fact that you're involved in Reach Out, because I'm assuming that very much plays into this sort of story, does it not?
Yeah, it's exactly, and it's why that leapt off when I originally got involved. It's why Reach Out as a charity sort of leapt off the page at me when I saw it, and why I was immediately keen to be involved. And I started by actually doing some volunteering work supporting the CEO in thinking about the organization, where he wanted to take it at the time, and how to think about investing in the future of the organization, building a business plan, articulating a strategy. From there, I became a trustee of the charity, and I've spent some time in the schools which they support and seen the work firsthand that Reach Out's able to do. And the important thing about Reach Out is it's not about simply supporting attainment. It's not about improving academic standards in and of itself. That's part of it. But what it's really about is reinforcing character strengths. And I thought that was so important, because what allows people ultimately to be successful is having that character, having resilience, for example, right? Having integrity. These are the things that are really important in helping people, again, as I say, be the best version of themselves. One of the things that became very clear to me early on in my career was the power of pulling together teams that thought or worked in different ways. So, and that's been a consistent lesson for me across every organization I've worked in since. And I always refer to it as cognitive diversity. And cognitive diversity is coming through from bringing different insights, different experiences, different skills together. But those things, those insights and experiences in particular, are based on that diversity of gender, geography, race, sexuality, personality, as well as specialism. And I always found that through those teams, we delivered better outcomes. And I've always sought to build teams that have that cognitive diversity.
You mentioned about bringing in people with different backgrounds, and have you almost had to individually, you almost like train yourself to think differently when you are approaching those sort of interviews or hiring processes? Because consciously, statistically, it's to be seen that people typically hire people which are similar. It's reality. Some people gone to the same university, or they went through the same accountancy firm, or whatever it may be. But as you said, hiring people from different backgrounds and different ways of thinking is really positive. Have you had to, as I say, it's almost like train yourself to think like that, so you are open-minded to those different possibilities?
Absolutely. So where I really had to think carefully about how I want to pull my teams together and bring cognitive diversity into those teams was when I worked at Anglo American, which is a huge global organization, had over 100,000 people working there across many different countries. And I had, with the support of the then CFO, I had the opportunity to really develop a team that was comprised of the best performing talent in the organization, with the view that not only would we make a contribution to Anglo, but actually I would be developing commercial leaders for the future. Okay. And so I was able to go across the organization and really think about who I wanted to pull in. And it occurred to me relatively early on that I thought I was building a diverse team because I was bringing people in who'd worked in different countries. We had, naturally, almost without thinking about it, we had gender diversity and we had racial diversity because of the nature of the organization. And I had people from different parts of the business, and I had people who'd worked in different functions. And I thought, brilliant, it's a really diverse team here. Until I really sort of started to get into some of the conversations and think about it. And I realized we all thought the same way. We were all analytical. We were all structured. There were variations in the solutions we would think about when it came to problems, but they were variations. They weren't radically different ideas. And then I got really interested in thinking about, well, why is that the case? Is there something we're missing? And I got to talking to some people who actually spent a lot of time thinking about these challenges, including some academics actually, and debating this idea with them. And that's what really opened up my eyes to this concept of genuine cognitive diversity. Putting people around you who don't think like you, who don't necessarily whose framework is different, right? Yep. In terms of how they make decisions. And then I did change the way that I started to interview, because I started to look for that. I started to look for people, there's certain questions you can ask or you can draw out of people's experiences, whether they are very values-based as opposed to being much more logical and analytical, whether, how creative they are. You can see how they like to work. Are they more flexible in the way they work, or are they very structured in the way they work? And out of that, I was able to build those more diverse teams. And I got, as a result, a lot more value from those teams. And I also recognize that there's no right and wrong answer. I mean, this is about how the team fits together. I always think about a team as a jigsaw puzzle.
Yep. You love an analogy.
Yes, I do. You know that, yeah. So I think about the team as a jigsaw puzzle, and you know what overall the sort of blend of skills you want, some of which, inevitably you want them to almost conflict because you want there to be debate within the team. You want to throw up different ideas, but you don't need all of those skills in just one or two people, because if you've got 5 or 6 people in your team, then you want them coming out from everyone. So, then I started to think about kind of holistic team management and what's the bit that I'm missing and how do I bring that in? So it wasn't just about the role, and it wasn't just about this person thinking in this way or that way. It was about how does this person fit with everybody else who's already there.
That's fantastic. And do you, I guess something which I am still keen to really understand is, we've spoken about, how you've built teams, how you've changed the way you're thinking, and how the positive output comes with doing that. I guess one thing I'm always interested to understand is you've used the word fortunate quite a few times to describe opportunities you've had, which suggests it hasn't been something which has easily come to you and you've had to work for it, or you feel gratitude towards being given that opportunity. There's a lot of people out there that wouldn't ever say they felt fortunate, and they always feel it's their right. And with that in mind, have you changed or shaped the way you do things now in a leadership role to ensure those opportunities are there for people, because they weren't always there before, so that people don't always feel fortunate to have been given them? Is there anything you've done in, whether it be this organisation or previous ones, to try and create that sort of environment where people are given those broader opportunities?
I think the reason that I say I've been fortunate is because I've had line managers who have been prepared to support me and nurture the talent, or people who've been prepared to give me an opportunity when, for example, I haven't been what might have been described as the conventional candidate. So I'm a chief financial officer of a circa FTSE 50 company who's not an accountant. And this is my first role as CFO of a public company. And I would argue that therefore I'm not a conventional candidate. But you need people who are prepared to get over that and to actually give you that opportunity. And the more people that do that, the more diversity we'll see in corporate life, the more I think we will see it become natural in our selection process as we think about our future leaders within the organization. So in terms of what do? Well, I do exactly that, or at least I seek to. And you've got to hold yourself accountable for always standing back and thinking, am I making the obvious choice? Have I thought more broadly about the candidates that are available? Have I thought more broadly about the value that this role can really deliver as part of the organization and as part of my team? Am I pushing myself to explore those areas where I think somebody brings something different? And actually, if there is a lack of experience, or if someone's bringing a different style, should we embrace that? Should we bring that in? Can we help support that person in terms of the people that sit below them in the organization, and therefore create that opportunity for them to come in and really make a difference? And that's, I think, what all of us as leaders have to do in our organizations to help nurture and develop that talent.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it is a huge responsibility as well, to make that happen. And I think what a lot of people don't recognise, and people in your own shoes, is that you are a role model to many people in your business. You may not think of it, and you may not be aware of it, but you will be. Just like people would have been previously for you, they probably weren't aware of it either. And I think the more awareness that an employer and employees can bring, and what you've said, I think, is absolutely spot on about the opportunities being provided, about the right infrastructure being in place, and about almost forgetting that word brave. It's about capability at the end of it. I think businesses as a whole flourish because of it. I couldn't agree with you more. And with that in mind, have your experiences, have the opportunity you've been, have they enabled you to enhance the awareness of things like D&I in your business and across, your colleagues as well? Are they as aware of it as you are, perhaps?
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. And I think it's at the heart of our strategy around people. I mean, inclusivity in particular, because we have to make sure that this just doesn't become a very specific debate. Each one of those things are really important because we want to ensure that there is broad representation across the organization. So we are reflecting the society which we serve. That's the most important thing. And what we really want to do is we want to make sure that we're getting the best of our people because they can be the best version of themselves at work, just like they are at home. And that's about investing in them, supporting them, and helping them see that the value that they bring is celebrated. I think we're going to be really careful about the framework we make for decision making and some of the language we use. I mean, we often speak about qualities when we make appointments. We talk about risk of appointing someone or making a brave decision. What does that mean? We talk about cultural fit. What does that mean? We talk about gravitas. But what does that mean? Now, none of these things are trivial. They're all important, and I think they do need to be considered. But are we excluding people based on some of those preconceived notions of what constitutes risk, or what do we mean when we say people have to fit within the culture? What do we mean when we say someone has gravitas or doesn't have gravitas? And are we capturing the additional value that people bring in the form of that cognitive diversity? That's what I think we have to drive, and that comes through having a truly.
Look, I think I couldn't agree with you more. And I think one thing we certainly experience, being in the privileged position we are doing executive search, is there are a lot of businesses, when they talk about diversity and inclusion, yes, it's a really topical thing for them, but they don't know what they're actually really trying to achieve from it. And you sort of find conversations sort of waffled through, and then the result is, oh yeah, we, as long as the shortlist is female. And you pause and you say, well, hang on, well, no, let's not think about. Let's start thinking about all the other characteristics we could be considering here. We've without revealing too much, we've had it before where businesses have said, well, hang on, that's a white male shortlist. But the reality is, what they're not looking at is other characteristics which aren't overly apparent. Who's to say there isn't a disability or their sexuality or all these different things that people haven't thought of. And I think, unfortunately, there is. You need to look at that state of grey a little bit more, and I think a lot of people aren't, and that's one of the issues we face.
And Marcus, I think that's the challenge. It's about getting that balance right, because I think, if we look at what the Hampton-Alexander report has been able to achieve in a short space of time, it's fantastic in terms of driving gender diversity in boards, moving to executive teams, moving to below executive teams, and the development of talent more broadly in the organization. And that's been a catalyst, not just actually for the gender debate. It's then become a catalyst for a broader debate, including all forms of diversity. And so I think there's a role for the conversation and for encouraging people, sometimes softly, sometimes in a slightly firmer manner, to really make the change, to drive that within organizations. Equally, you're right, we've got to be careful that in doing that, we don't leave other people behind. We don't create other disenfranchised groups. And that's why I think the inclusivity portion of the conversation is so important. And you're right, that's not just about people who look like me. That's also about my colleagues in the business who are white, who are male, who have grown up in this country, perhaps from middle-class backgrounds, but actually they themselves are individuals that have their own experiences, that bring their own insights to work. Yeah. And sometimes, just as you rightly say, sometimes we don't see all of those things, right? Sometimes there is something in their life which has been different, which has shaped their personality in a certain way, or given them an outlook on life, which is perhaps a little bit different. And we need to work harder to make sure we draw those things out from those people also.
I think that's spot on. I think everybody needs to work harder, and it's something we need to keep striving for as well. It's never going to be complete. It's never going to be, well, hopefully it can be achieved. A lot of inclusion and diversity in organisations, but everyone needs to keep wanting to do better. I think the second businesses feel satisfied, that's when the problems will start arising again. And that's when the creaks and cracks start appearing, in my opinion. But no, look, I think what you've said is unbelievably valuable. So thank you.
Early in my career, I would not have had a conversation about race, because I would have felt like this is something that marks me out as being different, and therefore draws the spotlight, and probably not in a helpful way. The person who shaped a lot of the way in which I think about life and work and kind of society is my grandfather. And he always used to say to me, he used to instill this really strong sense of, what are you doing for society? What would every single role you do? He was always very proud of the progress that I made throughout my career. But his question would always be, it would be two questions always at the end of it. One was, okay, what comes next? But you can get that sense of that drive to always push yourself harder. And the second one was, how is this helping? What are you doing for people around you? What are you doing for society? And I remember having this conversation with him once. As one of my cousins was marrying someone who wasn't Indian, and so it would have been a mixed family in terms of race. And I asked him kind of what his view is on this. Bear in mind, at this point he was in his late 90s, and he said, "No, this is brilliant. This is right." He said, "The way I think about it, Nimesh, is your parents, my children, came to this country to create a better future for you. And you can only have that better future if you really feel part of this country. And that means you have to integrate. You shouldn't forget that you're Indian by heritage, but you are British. You are part of the fabric of this country. You have a responsibility to this country to contribute. And as part of that, you've got to embrace everything about this country. And that means, you can't be insular as a community." And I've always thought about that as one of the reasons, I think, because I see that as a parallel, actually, with a lot of other people I speak about. I've always thought about that as one of the reasons that I think, that immigrant families can be successful. I think you really have to want to be part of that community more broadly, part of that country more broadly. And you have to embrace the culture. And that doesn't mean giving up your identity. It means augmenting your identity. And I think that's been powerful. And I think we need to be careful also that it doesn't go too far, that you don't end up washing away the things that actually make you unique, that heritage, that experience, everything you've learned. So it's getting the balance right that is key. But it's something that I'm always acutely aware of, particularly as I think about my children.
I was just about to ask you, the one question I was going to ask you is, do you say the same thing to your children? Do you say, what are you contributing to society? What's next? Are you instilling that in them?
100%. The two things I always say to my children, one is that I love that quote from Muhammad Ali, when I think it was Parkinson in an interview asked him, what would you have done if you hadn't been a boxer? And he said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I'd have done. I'd have been the best in the world at whatever it was, even if I was a garbage man. I'd have been the best in the world, right? And I say that to my daughters all the time, and they I think they understand what I'm saying, which is I don't really mind what you do with your life, so far as you push yourself to be the best that you can be.